Generation 6 is one of the most influential Pokemon generations of all time. It brought in Pokemon battle gimmicks, 3D models, and also the infamous fairy type. For this video, I'm gonna go back to where this all started and try to beat Pokemon X using only fairy types. On top of that, I'm also gonna be trying to beat this in a Nuzlocke format, which is gonna make it way harder. With that, I'm ready to get started, so I name myself Zango and wake up after getting ruthlessly pecked in the face by this fletchling. I shrug off the concussion I definitely got from that and move on to my mirror where I get absolutely dripped out. Now I meet up with my neighbors and they want to give me a nickname, and the one nickname they want to give me is Little Z, but I'm big and bulky and strong, so I pick Big Z. I've got to pick a starter here, but none of them are fairy types or evolve into fairy types, so I end up just picking Fennekin. This Fennekin I nicknamed Trash, as right after I get him, I move on to Route 3 where I can catch an actual Pokemon, Azurill. After Azurill gets in one of my 10 balls, I give him the nickname Sour, then I promptly move on to a Pokemon Center so I can trash the trash. I then start running back and forth in this city until eventually I raise my Azurill's friendship enough to get myself a Marill. At level 10, Marill wants to learn the move Rollout, which is so good for this first gym. That being said, starting this first gym battle against Viola means she's leading with Surskit as I lead with my Marill. Surskit outspeeds and starts with a Water Sport as I go for a Rollout that does half. On the next turn, I get hit by a Bubble, doing only 3 HP as I then go for another Rollout, but I miss. I'm able to hit my third Rollout, which takes Surskit down, and this leads into the final Pokemon, Vivillon. Vivillon's a pretty cut and dry case. I mean, my Rollouts are 4 times super effective. It takes a bit longer to take her out than I would have liked, but it really doesn't matter. She goes down in the end, and I win my first badge. The next step on my journey is to move on to Route 4 so I can catch another Pokemon. I can catch 2 different Pokemon here, Flabebe or Ralts, but I really am hoping for a Ralts because Gardevoir is just so much better. Thankfully, after running around in the grass for a little bit, I ended up getting myself a Ralts, which is really good. I nicknamed Ralts Sweet, then I get to go into Lumiose City. Once in Lumiose, I have a battle with the Professor, and my Rollout absolutely sweeps his team, as then I meet up with Lysander, who's got a wicked hairdo. How does he make it stick up like that? I move past him onto Route 5 where Marill evolves into a Azumarill. With my new and improved team, I walk on to Route 7 where I see a large Pokemon sleeping peacefully. Because there's no such thing as peace in the Pokemon world, I get a Pokeflute to wake him up, and then after waking him up, I battle him to make him faint again. I can only assume he fell into the river after this, but that's none of my problem, as on Route 7 I've got an encounter, and that's Flabebe. I catch Flabebe and give her the nickname Classic, as I then immediately evolve her into a Floette, as I do the same with Ralts into a Kirlia. With one more encounter left before the second gym, I move into Ambrit Town where I meet up with these professors who tell me to go to the Wow, I just had an aneurysm. They bring me to Glittering Cave where I catch him a while and see Team Flare. After passing by them, I can go into Silage City where I meet up with the second gym leader to fight him. This one's against Grant, and he leads with Amora as I bring out my Azumarill. Earlier in the game, I found the TM for Rock Smash, so I use that on Amora and it's 4 times super effective, so it just one-shots. This forces Grant to bring in Tyrunt, his final Pokemon. I outspeed and start out by going for a Rock Smash that brings him to a little bit above half, and it lowers his defense. On that same turn, I get hit by a Rock Tomb, lowering my speed, so that on the next turn Tyrunt outspeeds me and is able to hit a Stomp. Not only does this Stomp not really do anything damage wise, it also doesn't flinch me, so another Rock Smash in the next turn finishes off Grant's final Pokemon. Now it's time to move on to the next route where I can find another Pokemon, this one being Eevee. This Eevee that I caught will turn into a Sylveon later on, but I can't actually evolve it now because it doesn't know a fairy type move yet. I give it the nickname Salt, fight a little bit of Team Flare, then head into Geosenge Town. This little town has a lot of cool and really nice things in here, but one of the things that isn't so nice is this fight with Karina. This fight would have been a lot more difficult if her Lucario's new steel type moves, but thankfully they don't, so I beat her, and I move into the next route where I catch a Dedenne that I nicknamed Cool. The next thing I do is go into Reflection Cave and reflect on the fact that a lot of you aren't subscribed, so press the button, please. Before I get into the city, I evolve Kirlia into a Gardevoir, and once I make it into Shallower, I move on to fight my rival. Her team is actually really not that good right now. It's really bad at dealing with my fairy types, and after defeating her, I'm able to go challenge the third gym leader. Karina leads the battle with Mienfoo as I lead with Gardevoir. Once I get brought in, my ability Trace activates, and it actually takes Mienfoo's ability, which is Inner Focus. Now in the first turn, Mienfoo always goes for a Fake Out, but because I have Inner Focus now, I don't actually get flinched, and I'm able to get off a Confusion. This Confusion easily OHKOs and leads into the next Pokemon, Machoke. Machoke gets hit by a Confusion on turn 1 that brings him down into the red as he then misses a Rock Tomb. This is really bad for him as Karina's forced to start spamming full restores until eventually Machoke goes down and brings out the final Pokemon, Hawlucha. Right away, Hawlucha hits me with a Flying Press that does almost no damage as I go for a Confusion, doing about 2/3 and confusing her. On the next turn, I get hit by a second Flying Press that does almost as little as it did last time, and a Confusion is enough to finish off Hawlucha's remaining HP. That gets me the third badge, and it also earns me another fight with Karina. Yay! This one takes place on this big old tower over here, and she actually takes away all my Pokemon and forces me to use her Lucario. This doesn't matter to me though, as it just makes it more embarrassing when she loses to her own Pokemon. Now I just head towards the next city, and once I make it here, Serena informs me that we've got another battle coming up. Yet again, her team really just isn't that good at dealing with my fairies, so she gives me a free path into the gym. In this gym, I'm up against the grass type gym leader Ramos, and he leads with Jumpluff as I start out with Cool. Jumpluff starts with a Leech Seed as I go for a probiotic charge that only does about a fourth, and that just gets healed up after the turn. On the next turn, I get hit by an Acrobatics that brings me down to 66 as I then go for a Nuzzle, which I probably should have gone for in the first turn. This Nuzzle allows me to outspeed Jumpluff on the next turn and go for a Volt Switch that brings me into Sweet. I get hit by an Acrobatics on the switch in that brings me down to 60, and on the next turn, I go for a Confusion that brings Jumpluff to about a third remaining. Jumpluff then sets up a second Leech Seed as on the next turn I hit another Confusion that finishes off Jumpluff and leads into the next Pokemon Go-Go. For Go-Go, I start out by making a switch into Honey and setting up a couple of fake tears before eventually switching out into Salt. On the switch in, I get brought down to 93 by a Bulldoze, and on the next turn I get hit by a Takedown that brings me down to 57. On that same turn I got hit by a Takedown, I'm able to go for a Swift that brings Go-Go down to half, and on the next turn I get hit by another Takedown that brings me all the way down to 19. I absolutely just risked a crit right there, but it's okay as another Swift finishes off Go-Go and leads into the final Pokemon, Weepinbell. For Weepinbell, I switch back into Gardevoir and go for a Confusion, finishing him off and winning myself my 4th badge. After leaving the 4th gym, I go to the power plant that's been taken over by Team Flare, and here I fight a ton of Team Flare members. These guys are really weak and have about 1 to 2 Pokemon at most. That ended up being a slaughter, and it allows me to go into Lumiose City where I can challenge the 5th gym. This 5th gym badge is the Electric, and it's up against Clement. He leads the battle with Emolga as I lead with Dedenne. Emolga is a pretty decent Pokemon, but it's pretty bad against Dedenne as it doesn't have any moves that do any damage at all. That being said, I'm able to spam a ton of probiotic charges until eventually Emolga goes down and leads into the next Pokemon, Magneton. Now with Magneton, this is not the case as it has Mirror Shot, which is super effective against most of my fairy types. Magneton does have one fatal flaw though, because it always goes for electric terrain on the first turn. Knowing this, I decide to go for 2 probiotic charges to bring Magneton down into range where I can KO with a Dig. This works perfectly as Magneton gets finished and leads into the final Pokemon, Heliolisk. Heliolisk outspeeds and goes for a Thunderbolt that does massive damage to me as I decide to go for a Volt Switch to move out. I decide to move into Salt, who's an absolute unit, and after a couple of Moonblasts, Heliolisk goes down and I win my 5th badge. Now that I've conquered the 5th gym, I'm able to go into the Lumiose Cafe where I meet up with Lysander and the Professor, and he gives me a ton of King's Rocks. This is a relatively useless item for me, but I hope in one playthrough I'll be able to use it because it's just kinda cool. That being said, after all that fighting in the gym, I've earned yet another battle with my rival. She leads the battle with Meowstic as I lead with Sylveon. Meowstic sets up a light screen, but even with that, Sylveon's able to absolutely melt her. Absol's next, and once he comes in, he hits me with a Bite that flinches me, and on the next turn, he nails me with a Slash that gets a critical hit. This really isn't that deep though, as I hit a Moonblast, bringing Absol down into the red, as he then crits me again with a Quick Attack, but I'm able to finish off with one of my own. Lastly is Greninja, who gets taken down by a couple of power-up punches by my Azumarill, and that ends up being my rival. Unfortunately, after this, my rival wants to spend even more time with me and drags me to this spooky house. This house really isn't that scary, the story is kinda mid to be honest, and the only thing scary about it is this absolutely dreadful camera angle. This guy then asks me for a tip, and because I hate gratuity, I decide not to give it to him and just move on to the next city. In this place, I've got a date with Valerie, and she leads the battle with Mawile as I lead with Sour. On the first turn, I outspeed and go for a power punch, raising my attack by 1, doing about a 4th maybe, and Mawile sets up an Iron Defense. On the next turn, the same thing happens, yet I do even less damage than before. Luckily, in the third turn, I'm able to end this loop as I get a critical hit with Power Punch, finishing off Mawile and bringing me to +3 going into Mr. Mime. Mr. Mime gets wiped by an Aqua Tail and forces the last Pokemon Sylveon to come out. Sylveon is a lot more bulky than Mr. Mime, but even with that, an Aqua Tail brings him below half, and on the next turn, I go for a Dig, which does enough damage to finish him off. This gets me badge 6, as next up is the Pokeball Factory. This is just yet another instance of Team Flare being an absolute annoyance in this game. Once I get them all cleared out, I get the option between a Big Nugget and a Master Ball, and I can be the Nugget Man, so of course I picked the Big Nugget. Going on to the next route, Route 15, gives me another encounter, and this one's a Klefki. I catch Klefki and give her the nickname Nacho, then I move on to the Frost Cavern where I skate around for a little bit before eventually running into some more Team Flare. These battles, as usual, are extremely uneventful, and after successfully taking them down, I save this Abomasnow, and he allows me to ride this Mamoswine so I can get into Anastar City. Once I get here, I admire the scenery a little bit until eventually I've got to go back to the main story and fight my rival for the 4th time. in this video. It's a sweep, as usual, and thankfully there's only one more battle with Serena left in this game, but that happens a little bit later on, so let's just get to the 7th gym. Olympia starts by bringing out her Sigilyph as I bring out Cool. With Cool, I start out by going for a Thunderbolt that brings Sigilyph down into the red, as she then sets up a Light Screen. After the Light Screen, on the next turn she heals as I go for another Thunderbolt, but it doesn't do nearly as much damage. It takes me 2 more turns to zap away Sigilyph's remaining HP with a few more Thunderbolts, and that leads into the next Pokemon, Slowking. Against Slowking, I do even less damage with a Thunderbolt as she hits me with a Yawn. Thankfully, on that same turn, Light Screen actually runs out, so when I go for a Volt Switch on the next turn, it does big damage. This switch moves me into Honey Mime a while, and a Crunch finishes off Slowking's remaining health, leading into the final Pokemon, Meowstic. Meowstic starts with a Fake Out, flinching me, as on the next turn, she sets up a Calm Mind. I get off a Crunch that deals exactly half, but I know Meowstic probably kills me on the next turn. Now, Crunch has 80 base power, and so does Sucker Punch, and Sucker Punch usually always hits first if the opponent is using an attacking move, so I decide to go for that. Thankfully, I get a decent enough damage roll, and I'm able to take down Meowstic's remaining HP and win myself my 7th badge. Once I get that, we've got to move quickly, as Lysander plans to take out the entire world, for Lord knows what reason. To stop him, I go to the cafe we met at earlier, and I hear some really suspicious side dishes before eventually walking up to this bookcase and saying "Open Sesame" to meet Lysander. His team really isn't that great yet. I mean, it's not fully evolved, so of course it's not, but later on, it's definitely going to be a problem. That being said, I get myself an elevator key and move up to the top floor, where I unfortunately get to watch this secret weapon blow up everything in Geosenge Town. If I was a resident of Geosenge Town, I would be absolutely furious. Not only is there a massive hole in my front yard, but my property value definitely just tanked. I head further down into the Team Flare base, where I meet up with Shauna, and she says, "But friends should stick together," but we're not friends, so I leave her in the dust, and now it's more Team Flare. Once they're all down, I get to watch the birth of a legendary Pokemon, and now time for the big fight against Lysander. Lysander starts with Mienshao as I lead with Zoomerl. I thought Mienshao would start out with a high jump kick, but he actually didn't, and he uses Swords Dance, so I actually use Aqua Ring really poorly here. Regardless, that high jump kick comes out in the next turn and deals some pretty massive damage to me as I go for a Play Rough that finishes off Mienshao. I slowly start to heal up my HP when Pyroar comes in, and once Pyroar comes in, I'm able to go for an Aqua Tail, wash away the big lion, and lead into the next Pokemon, Honchkrow. Honchkrow starts with an Aerial Ace that brings me down to 45 as I then go for a Play Rough that's enough to OHKO. This forces Lysander to bring out his final Pokemon, Gyarados. For the Gyarados, I start out by making a really critical switch here, and that's moving into my Gardevoir. My Gardevoir has Trace, so once I come in, I trace Gyarados' regular ability, and it's Intimidate, so I'm able to lower his attack by 1 stage. He then Mega Evolves and deals some pretty big damage to Gardevoir in the process as I get brought down to 88 by an Earthquake. It's almost guaranteed that I die to an Iron Head here, so I decide to switch out into Honey. Honey gets brought down to 46 by an Iron Head, and on the next turn gets brought down to 20 remaining HP by an Earthquake as I'm able to hit a Rock Tomb, which lowers Gyarados' speed by 1 stage. I don't really see another way of getting out of this fight without losing a Pokemon, so with Mawile, I go for another Rock Tomb, which lowers Gyarados' speed by 2, and I get hit by an Earthquake, which takes me down. Really unfortunate that I lost a Pokemon there, but it does give me a free switch into my Sylveon, so I'm able to get off a free Moonblast, finishing off Gyarados and winning me my battle against Lysander. That right there is my final fight against Team Flare, and it causes Lysander to go insane and activate the secret weapon and fire it on itself. It breaks, so I guess no harm, no foul. Regardless, now all I've got left is a small bit of story on Route 19 where I've got to fight my rivals. These 3 battles are against Shauna, Tierno, and this guy that is extremely forgettable. I'm able to defeat all of their teams pretty easily, and this just leads me into Snowbell City where the final gym is located. Before fighting the gym, I get myself a Florges, then I go find Wolfric, tell him to get back to his job, and then challenge him in my final gym battle. Wolfric leads the battle with Abomasnow as I lead with Nacho. On the first turn, I miss my Mirror Shot, and then Abomasnow hits me with an Energy Ball. This doesn't do too much, as in the next turn I hit my Mirror Shot, it does about half, and then Abomasnow hits me with an Ice Beam that, again, doesn't do too much. One turn later, Abomasnow goes down to a second Mirror Shot, and this leads into the next Pokemon, Cryogonal. Cryogonal starts by confusing me, and then after being confused, I hit myself with Confusion, so in the next turn, I just decide to switch out into Sour. With Sour, I go for a Power Punch that gets a critical hit and one-shots. This forces Wolfric to bring out his final Pokemon, Avalugg, and against Avalugg, I start by going for another Power Punch. Now, every time I hit a Power Punch here, I'm raising my attack by 1 stage, so I'm doing more and more damage, but Avalugg is extremely defensively tanky, so it's not going to just go down that easily. After 2 Power Punches, I've got Avalugg down to half, and this means that my attack is at +3, so I kind of figured I would just just kill with another one. I was almost right about this, but I ended up getting an extremely low damage roll, which allowed Avalugg to survive. I absolutely thought this was the end of my Azumarill, but for some reason, Avalugg decided to go for a curse. I know Wolfer's gonna heal here, so after he does, I hit him with a power-up punch that does about a third, and now I absolutely have to switch. To be honest, I probably should have done that way earlier, as a single Psychic is enough to finish off his remaining HP, and with that, I get my final badge. Wolfric sends me off towards Victory Road, where I've got one big battle left before the Elite Four. This fight is my final battle against Serena, and it goes by really easily. I mean, my team is just a bunch of fairy types, her team has way too many dark types, and it's kind of just over. With that being said, I level up my team to the level cap, improve it just a little bit with moves and all that, but I'm now ready to just fight the Elite Four. For my first fight, I decided to take on Malva, and she leads with Pyroar as I lead with Sour. Pyroar starts out with a 4 times not very effective flamethrower, so as you can imagine, it doesn't really do too much. That being said, I get to wash away yet another line in this run with an Aqua Tail, and once Pyroar goes down, the next Pokemon to come out is Talonflame. Talonflame does a lot of damage, and once he hits me with a Brave Bird, he brings me down to 105. Thankfully, my Aqua Tails are extremely strong, so she ends up going down to that, as next up is Torkoal. Torkoal is slower than dirt, so my Aqua Tail actually outspeeds and kills. The last Pokemon to come out is a Chandelure, and Chandelure starts out by going for a Flamethrower that's, again, 4 times not very effective, so an Aqua Tail takes her down, and that wins my first Elite Four battle. For my next one, I decide to go up against the Dragon-type Elite Four member, Drasna. Drasna leads with a Dialga as I lead with my Azumarill again. With Azumarill, I start by going for a Play Rough that brings Dialga down into the red, but unfortunately gets me infected with poison. On that same turn, I get hit by a Sludge Bomb that deals a big chunk of my health. Thankfully, on the next turn, Dialga ended up healing, so a couple more Play Roughs are enough to take her down. Now, unfortunately, because of the poison, my Azumarill is really low, so I decided to switch out into Gardevoir. On the switch in, I get hit for minimal damage, and on the next turn, I go for a Dazzling Gleam that brings Altaria down into the red. Because Drasna used all of her full restores already, she can't actually heal here, so I just take her down with another Dazzling Gleam. Noivern's next, and she obviously outspeeds me, so she goes for an Air Slash that does minimal damage, as I then go for a Dazzling Gleam. This is enough to take away all of her HP, and bring out the final Pokemon Dredagon, who also gets one-shotted by a single Dazzling Gleam. With that, I'm off towards the Flood Chamber next to fight Seabold. He starts with a Clawitzer, as I lead with Dedenne. I start out by going for a Thunderbolt that brings Clawitzer down into the red right away, and it actually paralyzes. On that same turn, I get nailed by a Water Pulse that brings me down to below half, and it also confuses me. I know Seabold's gonna heal, so I decide to go for a Volt Switch, and it ends up hitting, which allows me to switch out. For this switch, I move into Sweet and go for a Thunderbolt, which finishes off Clawitzer's remaining HP, and leads into Gyarados. Gyarados is 4 times weak to Thunderbolt, so I'm able to zap him out of the battle with that, as next out comes Barbarnacle. This, horrendous looking Mon gets 2-shotted by Thunderbolt, and this leads into the final Pokemon, Starmie. For Starmie, I bring in Classic, who's a special defensive wall, and since she's not really getting hit for that much damage, I decided to just go for a couple of Energy Balls. That takes down Starmie, and wins me my 3rd Elite Four battle. My last fight is going to be the hardest one of the run, and it's against Wickstrom and his Steel types. He leads the fight with Klefki, as I lead with Sylveon. Klefki starts out by setting up spikes against my team, as I go for a Light Screen. On the next turn, I move out into Azumarill, who gets hit by a Flash Cannon on the switch in, bringing me down to 168. On the next turn, I get hit by a second Flash Cannon, and then go for an Aqua Ring to heal up a little bit each turn. After that, I start to spam Power Punch to raise my attack, and eventually take down this Klefki. Once I take her down, I'm at +3 attack, going into the next Pokemon, Probopass. For Probopass, I start out by going for a Power Up Punch, which brings him down to Sturdy immediately, as he then hits me with a Discharge that does a good bit of damage to me, bringing me down to the red. It's at this point where I can absolutely abuse the Sturdy mechanic, and continue to bring Probopass down to 1 HP, so that Wickstrom keeps healing. Not only does he use all of his full restores here, but he also allows me to bring myself up to +6 attack. Eventually, Probopass ends up going down, and this brings out the 3rd Pokemon, Scizor. I kind of thought Scizor would go for a Bullet Punch here, so I was a little bit scared of staying in, but I decided to do it anyways, and it ended up being a great decision, as he didn't, and I come out of that unscathed. With that, Wickstrom's onto his final Mon, Aegislash. Aegislash starts with a King Shield that lowers my attack by 1 stage, and on the next turn, I actually outspeed him, and I'm able to OHKO with a single Aqua Tail, and that wins me my final Elite Four battle. With all of that finished up, I move on to the Radiant Chamber so I can fight the champion, Diantha. She leads the battle with Hawlucha, as I lead with Dedenne. Diantha starts out by going for a Poison Jab, bringing me down to 64, as I then go for a Thunderbolt, and that's just enough to finish off Hawlucha. With that, the next Pokemon to come in is Tyrantrum, and for Tyrantrum, I decided to go for a Volt Switch and move into Gardevoir. I thought Tyrantrum would go for like an Earthquake or something, maybe, you know, anything other than Head Smash, but he ends up going for that, and it absolutely obliterates Gardevoir. Extremely unfortunate to see her go, but it's fine, because it gives me a free switch into Sylveon. Once Sylveon is in, Diantha heals, but it doesn't matter, as Moonblast is just super effective and absolutely murks this thing. Now Now the next Pokemon to come out is Aurorus, and this is kinda hard to deal with. Aurorus makes this really easy on me though, as she just kinda sits there as I hit her with a ton of Moonblast. She ended up bringing me down to 195 before going down, and the next Pokemon to come in is Goodra. Goodra gets off a Fire Blast that brings me down to 149 as I get off a Moonblast, and it brings her down to half. On the next turn, Goodra hits me with a second Fire Blast that brings me down to exactly 100 remaining, as a second Moonblast is enough to finish her off. Diantha's second to last Pokemon is Gorygeist, and she starts by going for a Phantom Force and vanishing. This unfortunately enough makes my attack miss, as on the next turn I get hit by that Phantom Force, get brought down to 18 HP, and then finish off Gorygeist with a Shadow Ball. Now I'm on to Diantha's final Pokemon, Gardevoir. Gardevoir comfortably outspeeds my Sylveon, so I feel like I just gotta sack it here. That's exactly what I do, is it gives me a free switch into Klefki, and with Klefki, since I have Prankster, I actually outspeed and can go for a Thunder Wave. This Thunder Wave ensures that all of my remaining Pokemon will outspeed Gardevoir in the future, just in case Klefki ends up going down here. With that, Gardevoir goes for a Thunderbolt, bringing me to 100 remaining, and on the next turn, I go for a Foul Play that brings her down to about 2/3. Gardevoir then goes for another Thunderbolt, and it unfortunately gets a critical hit, taking down my Klefki. With that, I switch into Azumarill, and since I'm faster than Gardevoir, I go for an Aqua Tail safely, and it takes her down, winning me my final battle of this run. With the run finished up, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, if you could leave a like and subscribe, that would really help me out. And with that being said, that was my attempt at a Pokemon X Hardcore Nuzlocke using only Fairy types.